Today is about the things that nobody at the closed frontier labs can keep anymore. 3 of them, really. The smartest people, the best models, and the machines that run them. The biggest AI labs built their whole position on the idea that those 3 could be owned, hired, or walled off, or fenced behind an export rule. And today, all 3 are slipping at once. 2 of DeepMind's most important minds quit in a single week. Chinese open-weight models just crossed a line that nobody expected this soon, and a researcher who helped name AGI is trying to give it away on purpose. Stay with me because 2 of today's stories are panics aimed at the wrong thing entirely, and by the close, you'll see what the real shift actually is. Let's get into it. Start with one number, because it reorganizes the whole week. Chinese open-weight models now handle the majority of the work running through OpenRouter's 10 most used systems. In late 2024, that share was under 2%. Today, it's past half. So let's unpack that. OpenRouter is a marketplace that developers use to send their queries out across many different AI models. Its top 10 ranking by token use is a measure that tells you what people actually run in production. So this is real work measured in usage rather than benchmark scores. And more than half of that work now runs on Chinese open weights. Qwen, DeepSeek, Kimi, GLM, MiniMax, for example. Just a little more than a year ago, that number was so small, it barely registered. The clearest example right now is a model called GLM 5.2 from the lab Z.AI. It is the leading open-weight model on the Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index with a composite capability score 0 to 100 sitting at 51, which is ahead of the next open model by 11 points. It even scored level with GPT 5.5 on one of the agentic benchmarks, and on a deliberately AI-resistant coding test, it beat Claude Opus 4.8 on readable, maintainable code. A former DeepMind VP called it the first open model that's good enough to be a daily driver. Now, let's look at the other side of the same news cycle. 2 of Google DeepMind's most important people walked out the door. John Jumper, the AlphaFold creator, a 2024 Nobel laureate, left for Anthropic. And in the same cycle, Noam Shazeer, a Transformer co-author that Google paid billions to bring back, left for OpenAI. We covered both departures in episodes earlier this week. Google's best model reportedly slid to 5th now on the public index. So internal morale, per the reporting, has curdled into frustration and broad discontent. So let's distill this into plain language. The labs trusted 2 things to keep them ahead: the people who build the breakthroughs and the models that those people build. But this week, we've learned that neither of those stay contained. That talent, of course, turns out to be portable. It walks out with people carrying the craft in their head, and the capability turns out to find its own level, showing up in freely available models faster than any wall goes up. The frontier that the export rules were built to fence is being outshipped by weights that anyone can grab for basically nothing. Now let's stay with that open path as we shift to another story here, because one person is trying to build it on purpose. Ben Goertzel, the man who helped put the phrase artificial general intelligence into circulation, is refusing the road that almost everyone else is running. Instead of venture capital, he's wiring his project SingularityNET to a crypto network and a token called FET. His line in a Forbes piece framed as his crypto bet against OpenAI: "I'm pretty adamant that the core AGI code doing the thing should be free and open source." But his sharper point sits even one level down from there, and it ties straight back to the first story we talked about today. Open code helps you very little if running it still needs a hyperscaler's server farm. A hyperscaler is referring to one of the handful of cloud giants, the only outfits whose data centers are big enough to run the largest models. So open weights are theoretical if only those hyperscalers can even run them. But here's his answer to that: spread the first AGI across a decentralized network. In his words, spanning 50 different countries and controlled by 10,000 different people. And he points at Linux and the internet as proof: open infrastructures that still let plenty of people make a living. Now, the crypto token wrapper deserves a second look. It is a claim about how to hold the open path, but not a finished thing. But the objective underneath it is really solid, and the rest of the day keeps proving that. The compute floor that Goertzel names as the real barrier, that is the thing dropping, cycle after cycle. Now let's shift over to a fear that the data just pulled apart. The story everyone tells is that AI is taking the jobs. So Gallup went and asked the people actually losing those jobs. And among recently laid off US workers, just 1% pointed actually straight to artificial intelligence as the reason. Just 1%. A full quarter of those people were fully remote. And when asked what really happened, they named budget cuts, the economy, and lost business. So let's hold the pain here really honestly. Layoffs nearly tripled between 2022 and 2025 before finally leveling off at 21% or so. This is a tense market, and it's genuinely hard on the people caught midstream. But the thing eating those jobs mostly isn't an AI model. And there is an even subtler cost in that same data. A science study this month attributes about a third of the decline in worker mental health since 2011 to remote arrangements. Solo remote workers saw an 83% jump in the chance of going entire workdays with no human contact at all. Now, set that next to who's hiring. Lloyds Banking Group, a 261-year-old bank, just launched a 300-person hiring drive to help build out its agentic AI layer. That's systems of AI agents that take actions, flag fraud, search HR documents, and let a customer ask plain language questions about their money. The recruits join an existing 1,000-person AI team already trying to run Anthropic's Claude and building on Google's Gemini. Generative AI added £50 million to the bank's balance sheet last year, and they expect £100 million this year. So I won't flatten this. The same bank declined to rule out future cuts, and its CEO has already said it'll reduce some jobs in some areas. And Standard Chartered, you'll remember, cut 7,000 roles last month, as we covered here. Its chief executive later apologized for calling it replacing, in some cases, lower-value human capital. That's a quote. And employers have named AI as their top reason for announced cuts 3 months running. So the workers are saying one thing, while the employers say another. But both are in the data. And that gap is a story. Underneath, the job market is sorting into a thin layer that builds and directs the agent, and a wider field is absorbing that churn. The directing roles are being created as fast as the routine ones are dissolving. The model itself mostly isn't the thief that the headline continues to name. The loneliness that the remote era built, that may be the cost that nobody actually put on the poster. All right, let's go over to Russia, where the state is betting big on talent and running into one wall that talent alone cannot climb. Russia has mounted a full state drive to grow homegrown AI talent. A new presidential commission now sets national AI policy. The school and university curricula got rewritten to foreground the technology. Moscow State University opened an AI faculty, and its first 72 students start in September with access to one of the country's most powerful supercomputers. The National Informatics Olympiad, running since 1989, added AI this year. The target is lift Russia's output of AI specialists from about 3,000 or so in 2022 to 15,500 by 2030. The organizing claim from the top is, talent is everything. Everything else is a consequence of talent. And there is a real basis for the bet. The population is 140 million people with deep roots in mathematics. But also read that claim for what it leaves out. It routes your attention right past the one input that Russia cannot produce. 2 problems. First, the talent is already leaving. After the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, roughly a quarter of Russian software developers' public profiles went dark or showed that they had left the country. Second, and decisive, chips. Russia has scarce access to advanced semiconductors, little domestic capacity to fabricate them, and sanctions cutting off the hardware that the models actually need. Fabrication, making the leading-edge chips, takes machines only a couple of companies on Earth can build. No curriculum just conjures that. And notice who sits on that commission, too. The defense minister and the FSB director, seated alongside tech executives. The FSB is Russia's main security agency, and that tells you where the capability is meant to point in the leadership of Russia's mind. So let's look at the shape of all the stories we've covered today so far. The fabrication wall that Russia can't scale, and the talent wall that the labs in general cannot hold. Those are the same lesson read from 2 sides. Capability doesn't stay where any one actor pens it, and no amount of recruiting builds the one thing that the whole plan actually needs. Okay, quiet wonder of the day here, and it runs on exactly the kind of open model that we started with. Super resolution ultrasound can see past the limit of a normal scan. A regular ultrasound hits a physical resolution ceiling. The diffraction limit is what that's called. Super resolution, though, gets under it, down to the smallest blood vessels, the microscopic plumbing that is important in things like neurology, cancer, and heart disease. It stayed locked in research labs for two reasons. It takes an expert to tune the scan and then a specialist to read it. So that means it's slow, subjective, and scarce. But a framework published in the journal NPJ Digital Medicine just absorbed both of those jobs. A clinician speaks the task out loud, the system sets the imaging parameters, runs the super resolution reconstruction, pulls the quantitative vessel measurements, and writes a finished, structured diagnostic report, context and all. Time to report? About 4 minutes. What ties it to the rest of today is the engine room. It runs on two open-weight models, both freely available. DeepSeek R1 turns the spoken command into imaging settings. A model called MiniCPMV handles the image recognition, which means a hospital could, in principle and assuming sufficient compute, rebuild this on hardware and models that it downloads. No closed vendor platform at all. No licensing deal at all. Now, here's the honest framing of this. This is a demonstration, not a bedside system yet. And 14 clinicians did evaluate the output, and they found good integrity and standardized language. It's registered in the Chinese Clinical Trial Registry, but moving into routine care still means the regulatory and operational work any clinical imaging system has to go through. The capability, then, is shown. The deployment timeline lives in what comes after. Still, the two human roles that this used to require, the sonographer tuning the machine and the specialist reading it, just collapsed into a single spoken sentence and a 4-minute wait on models that anyone can pull down for free. Last one for today, and it's the other panic pointed the wrong way. A piece of fiction went viral through G7 week, and it's now being used to argue for a very specific outcome. It's called Europe 2031, and it's a speculative scenario written by a small group of Brussels-based AI researchers, think tankers, and investors. It imagines the EU economically dismembered by 2031 for failing to build its own AI, while the US and China carve up the field. Members of the European Parliament read it. It surfaced in unofficial UK-German diplomatic talk. But let's apply the simple test. What do the authors stand to gain? They want the piece to shock Europe into action, and the action they name is a full regulatory carte blanche for data center providers, and a massive build. Carte blanche in their mind means no regulatory friction. So, a piece of fear fiction written by people sitting at the intersection of AI and European policy works backward from catastrophe to a conclusion that happens to clear the path for the infrastructure rush. And the evidence that it leans on is, of course, crumbling. A critique on Gizmodo by the author Mike Pearl walked through this. The scenario name checks the $100 billion OpenAI NVIDIA deal, which evaporated in February, the $300 billion OpenAI Oracle agreement, which is now in doubt, a flagship Texas data center that OpenAI has since pulled out of. Its central premise is that America corners 70% of the world's compute, a number that the same news cycle keeps undercutting. The Gizmodo writer who's published these scenarios himself put it really plainly. Speculative writing throws out reality and keeps only the steps to a predetermined ending, and then readers mistake it for prophecy. Now, I won't flatten this because the worry underneath is valid. The piece was published one day before the US blocked foreign nationals from using Anthropic's Fable model. The authors say they feel vindicated by that, and on the one point, they do have a case. A model European businesses depended on could be switched off by a decision made in another capital. That dependency is genuine. What the scenario gets wrong, though, I think, is the destination. It treats the capability as a monopoly to be feared, but everything else today says the opposite. It's diffusing through open weights and sovereign compute onto hardware that anyone can own, and it's only getting better, able to run on smaller compute and faster. The answer to dependency looks less like a walled fortress then, and more like the commons that no single capital can switch off. All right, let's bring it to a close for today. The labs and the rule writers trusted 3 things to keep them ahead: the smartest minds, the best models, and the compute to run them. 3 moats, and every one of them sprang a leak at the same time. The minds turned out to be portable, walking out of DeepMind, for example, carrying the craft in their heads. The models turned out to diffuse and find their own level. Chinese open weights crossed to the majority of the work developers actually run. And the compute floor, the one barrier that Goertzel says open weights can't clear on their own, keeps dropping until a voice command runs hospital-grade ultrasound on models that you can obtain for free. And two of today's stories were fears aimed at the wrong loss. The workers losing jobs don't necessarily blame the model. They blame budgets and remote work. Europe's viral panic fears a monopoly that is dissolving while you read it. When you misname the threat, you build the wrong defense. A wall, a fence, an export rule, sitting against a thing that was never going to hold still. So here's what I would carry from today's news. Concentration was supposed to be the durable advantage, but it's turning out to be the perishable one. A capability that you can fence is a capability that someone else rebuilds, cheaper, in the open, before the fence is even finished. A seed can be ground into nothing underfoot, or it can take root in 1,000 fields that no walls could ever fence. What we saw today is that the seed keeps spreading. We'll see you tomorrow.